Start over. Welcome to the October meeting of the Narberth Planning Commission. It's October 5th at 6:07 p.m. I was trying to do a roll call of the planning commissioners. Jim Cornwell, I see. Heidi Boys, I see. Jim Spear, I see. Is Dave Brower present yet? Anyone see him? Okay. I would like also to welcome, there are, I believe we have 4 or 5 people here speaking for the applicant for 3 Elmwood tonight. We also have some observers from Lower Merion Township. In deference to the observers from Lower Merion Township, we are going to go right into the agenda item of 3 Elmwood and postpone all of our other agenda items tonight until the end. For the public, if you haven't attended a planning commission meeting before, just a moment of background. This is tonight, I'm anticipating this will be an informational conversation for the most part, where we will be able to ask the applicant to describe their project to us, and we will be able to ask questions on a range of topics. My understanding, and we'll confirm this when we start, that the applicant is going to issue an extension of the review period, and therefore we do not, as a planning commission, have to make a vote on this tonight. That will come back to us at some point in the future, at which there'll then be further presentation and a vote. I'm going to ask the applicants to present their project, and then I'm going to break the conversation down into a couple of basic topics. For each topic, I and the planning commissioners will have questions. We have the borough engineer and potentially the borough zoning officer who might have questions, and we'll discuss each of those topics. And at that point, we can also open the floor to questions from the public, questions about those topics. If people would like to speak generally about the project or have comments they'd like to make to support or oppose the project, we will reserve that to the public comment portion of the meeting, because it's important for us really to spend our time getting the information out, or discussing the kind of the aspects of this, the nature of this plan. I just want to make sure that starting now, I'm going to be recording this meeting. It's not recording up till now, but it will be recording, just so the tape knows at 6:10, and we just introduced the meeting and had a roll call. So with that, I would like to introduce the applicant and the team. And if I miss someone, forgive me. I just met everyone a moment ago. The applicant is Vincent Falcone. The applicant's attorney is Fred Framholm. The applicant's engineer is Chris Yohan. Ed Saranaki, architect, is here with the applicant's team. And there is one other person who I cannot find here. Who's the other person on your team? Just remind me.
Frank Tavani.
Frank Tavani is here to talk about traffic issues. So with that, I will first, I'll ask, I guess, Fred, you'd like to speak first, right?
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Yeah.
Can you also, when you speak, please address the issue of the extension? I'd just like to confirm whether or not that has been formally requested yet. But otherwise, I'll turn it over to you and your team.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I'm going to be very brief, and then I'm going to ask Chris Yohan to tell everyone about the plan. That's what I think everyone's interested in. This property, as you know, is 3 Elmwood Avenue. It's in 2 municipalities, Lower Merion and Narberth. We have land development applications pending in both municipalities, and we have either provided or will provide, we'll double check on that, extensions through the end of November of 2020 for action to be taken on our pending applications. We have received reviews from the Montgomery County Planning Commission that have been directed to each of the municipalities. It's complicated by virtue of the fact that the frontage is very much entirely in Lower Merion. but the largest percentage of land of this particular site is in Narberth Borough. And our hope is that both municipalities will view this development cooperatively. We're doing our best to satisfy all of the requirements of both municipalities, but there's some which are perhaps inconsistent, and we just need to iron out those wrinkles. We have a plan that Chris will present to you. But before he does, I just wanted to comment a little bit about the process. There have been prior discussions with both municipalities, and I think the thinking at both staff levels was that there would be a certain efficiency with this application being reviewed simultaneously by the planning commissions at a joint planning commission meeting. And that has always been our intent. Recently, we had a request from Narberth that just for preliminary informational purposes, so that there would be a better understanding, we were asked if we would make the presentation that we're going to make tonight. But we're not seeking any action or specific action by the Planning Commission tonight. Rather, we're we're presenting and discussing some ideas that will be alternative in nature. And we're looking for feedback, but we're looking for feedback from both municipalities. There is a civic association that is across the street in Lower Merion, the Shortridge Civic, and we have reached out to them, and our intent is to be making a presentation to them. We're trying to see if we can't get comfortably to the start point and zero in on a plan that would make most sense to everyone, and treat this property as properly as we can. So with that introduction, I'm going to call on Chris Yohan to talk about the plan. As you had mentioned, Todd Ed Sarnecki is the architect, and Frank Tavani, who's our traffic engineer, will also be sharing his thoughts about the alternative circulation plan. So, Chris.
Thank you, Fred. If I could share my screen now. Get back to that. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you see my screen?
No, not yet.
All right. How about now? Okay, sorry about that. So this is the existing conditions plan / vicinity plan. So I'd like to start with this. This is the property that I'm tracing here with the little hand. Basically, here is the 3 Elmwood house that fronts on Elmwood Avenue. Here is East Wynwood. As most of you know, Elmwood does not connect through to East Wynwood here. There is an old bridge that is no longer functioning, and so that's actually cut off. There is a stream that runs through the site that kind of separates the portion on Elmwood from the portion on East Wynwood. Also like to highlight the railroad tracks here. This is going underneath, and this is the Narberth Park on the other side of the railroad tracks. So that's the existing conditions plan. As many of you know, there's also a red light right here that allows traffic traveling west on Wynwood to go straight through, or there's a turn arrow to go through under the bridge. And I believe there's also 2 lanes of traffic coming eastbound, one that would continue through on Wynwood and one that would make a left under the bridge. So if I could forward to the first plan. So this would be, I'm going to start with the subdivision. The current owner is the owner of this 3 Elmwood property. There is this parcel line that you can see a little more clearly on this plan that separates the property into a Narberth portion and a Lower Merion Township portion. My understanding of how that line was created was this used to be the orientation of Wynwood, and when it was adjusted to have a more gentler curve. There became a portion on this eastern side of Wynwood that is a portion in Lower Merion and a larger portion in Narberth. So what we're proposing is a new property line that's along the center line of the stream to separate the 3 Narberth property from this property on the Wynwood side. And then we have another property line separating 2 new multifamily buildings. They each building would have 5 units in it, and so there'd be a total of 10. There currently is sidewalk along East Wynwood, which right now is right next to the curb. And so as through some comments from the township and county and borough, we're now showing that's a new 5-foot wide sidewalk that's pushed a few feet off of the curb. What we're showing on this plan is a shared driveway that has an ingress on the Lot 2 side and an egress on the Lot 3 side, with a shared parking lot in the back. We do show some covered parking in the back. We show a trash area, a loading space, and all of that would be shared between the 2 buildings. Another important thing to note is that with this stream that goes through the site, there is a FEMA floodplain. And so that is this darker line that I'm following now. Now it's important to note that on the floodplain map, there are different types of floodplain lines. There's a zone AE, which means that it's a stream that is studied and there's a specific elevation for the stream. At different points, if you look at the map, you would see cross sections across the stream showing it might be elevation 388 here and 389 somewhere else. In this case, it's zone A, which means it's not a studied stream. And instead, the floodplain line was approximated from FEMA based on aerial information or USGS contours, sometimes soils, or other historic data. So because it's not a studied stream, one of the things that we need to do as part of this process is to study it. And so we did prepare floodplain calculations, and we came up with a blue line that runs through the site here. You can see in this part, the blue line gets a little further from where FEMA had it. And in this location, it gets a little closer to the stream. Now we did that. We submitted the calculations to both Lower Merion Township and Narberth Borough. Fortunately, both have Pannoni engineers. And so Pannoni has forwarded that to their floodplain expert. They had some review comments, a handful of which we are addressing. And so at this time, I wouldn't consider this the final location. We have some things to revise to finalize that, to get agreement from Pannoni, Narberth, and then ultimately FEMA. We'd have to submit to FEMA for their approval. But you can see that the proposed development is intended to be outside of that FEMA line. We're not proposing any development inside the FEMA line at this time. That's FEMA. I think another big issue for this project is the access, because the red light is right here and we have this ingress and egress very close to it. It's going to limit the ability to turn in and out of the driveway. Essentially, there's 4 movements for a driveway. There is a left in movement, a right in movement, a left out, and a right out. And so through conversations between the traffic engineer for the project, Pannoni, and PennDOT, it was discussed that it's likely that this driveway would end up being only a right in and a right out. If it stayed in this location, we would have to provide some type of channelized island to help enforce that. I think that's most of it for this sketch. I do have an alternative sketch that I like to present for discussion as part of going through this process with Lower Merion Township and Narberth Borough. Questions came up of, is there another orientation for the driveway that might get the access further from the intersection? And so that's what this sketch is this is a one-way loop that you would go in on this easternmost side. You'd loop around the parking lot, come out on the westernmost. This entrance would be a right in and a left in. So this would have two movements, and the out would be a right only. So the difference between this sketch would likely be 3 movements as opposed to this one, which would be 2. Some of the other differences, at this time, this plan has 1 less parking space, although after further consideration, I think I could get 3 angled spaces in this location right here, so it would be no net change. The loading area and trash have been reoriented a little bit. Someone would come in on this side, pull directly forward. Trash truck would use the forks to get the dumpster, dump it over the top, pull back out, and then pull out this one-way driveway. So ideally, it would have the same number of parking spaces. You'll notice that I did remove the covered parking from this plan. One of the comments from the Montgomery County Planning Commission that I couldn't solve was an issue with building coverage and the location of that covered parking with respect to the rear property line. And so you'll see on this sketch, there's no covered parking. And the reality is we'd likely have to take it off of this one as well, unless we were able to obtain relief from Narberth. And I would be interested in the input from the Planning Commission on that, keeping in mind that behind this property is the railroad tracks, and they are significantly higher than the property. So no one on the other side of this property line is practically going to see these here. In fact, if you were on the train, you might see the top of them and might actually hide the car. So I am a little interested on the input on whether covered parking would be well received and whether a relief might be something that you'd recommend us seeking. Mr. Bressi, did I cover the main points here? Is there anything else that you think I missed I should go over before I open a little bit up? I guess I can go over the Borough Engineers Review Letter briefly just to identify a few other comments.
Actually, can you hear me?
Yes.
Could you please discuss the building massing, the buildings themselves?
Okay, so I will do my best at that. I am the engineer, so I'm not going to do as well with how the building looks. But I could tell for orientation, the way we've shown, so I zoomed in a little bit here, and I'm going to follow with the hand the municipal boundary. And so everything on this right-hand side is Narberth, and everything on the left-hand side is Lower Merion. So in Lower Merion Township in this district, which is MDR2 for medium density residential, they require a 10-foot minimum setback and a 20-foot maximum. And that's measured from the right-of-way line. The right-of-way line is this, what we call, it has a long line and then 3 dashes, and it goes through the sidewalk here. And so here's another dashed line, which is the minimum setback and then the maximum. And so what we tried to do here, because we're along a curve, we couldn't, well, I shouldn't say we couldn't do a straight line, but it seemed to make more sense to put a few jogs in the building. So we started all the way back on the 20-foot, but with the 2 buildings parallel to each other, we start to get closer to the 10-foot. Right around where we get to 15, we jog back again, we come straight. And so that's why we have the jogs in this building, is we were starting out at the 20-feet line, trying to keep some, without having strange angles in the building, to have parallel and perpendicular, some 90-degree angles. And so that's why we have the jogs. In terms of the units, each unit would or each building would have 5 units. The current orientation of those would generally be, if you're looking at the building from the street, that there would be a unit on the right and a unit on the left. And so on this building on the left, I'm going to switch over to the existing conditions plan to show a little bit that
I got back to the room and logged on, but I don't really know what they're talking about, period.
Excuse me, can you mute yourself? Can you mute yourself, please?
So if I could go back to the existing conditions plan for a second, you see the stream going through the site. These dashed lines are contour lines, and so where the lines are closer together, and they are 1 foot apart in elevation. So where the lines are closer together, it's steeper. You go up faster. Where they are further apart, it's flatter. So you can see there's not as many contour lines on the 3 Elmwood property, showing that it's a much flatter property, whereas this East Wynwood side slopes up more steeply. So the reason I show that is you can see that East Wynwood is sloping, which makes putting the units there a little trickier. And so what we have proposed is this unit on the right and one on the left. There are 3 levels, but essentially on this lower level, this building on the right is more at grade, and because we keep sloping up to the left, this is really tucked into the grade. So we don't have this lower level unit on this building. On the lower level, there's just one on the right, and then the second and third levels would each have 2. Conversely, on this unit, on this building too, this unit on the right is down at a lower level, a little above the floodplain. And so then as you come up the road, on the lower level, this area would be tucked into grade. So on the lower level, we only have 1 unit. It's on this right-hand side again. And on the second and third floor, there's 2. So each building has 5 units. Both of them have 3 on the right and 2 on the left in both cases. Todd, did that help answer your question about the massing?
Sure. We'll take that up as a topic, one of the topics a little later on in depth. Is there anyone else from your team who'd like to add anything? Sort of introductory nature at this point?
Maybe before, I'm sorry, a couple things I would like to go over quickly about the engineer's letter. Item number 5 talks about the property lines. And basically the code, the subdivision code, suggests the property lines should be perpendicular or radial to property lines into streets. And so what we're proposing as the property line between lots 1 and 2 is a meandering line that follows the stream. And so we would require a waiver of that code section for that property line. And so I'm interested in the Planning Commission's feedback on that. From my perspective, having a property line really at a stream is something that's been done for forever. We have that in differences between properties, between municipal boundaries, states, countries. That's a way that properties are often split. So I'm interested in that. One of the things that I talked about, this one way in on lot 2 and out on lot 3, and that being a shared driveway. The borough engineer and both zoning officer have noted that the code, the Narberth zoning code, prohibits 2-way driveways. And so even though we have a 1-way driveway on each side, that's not meeting the code. And so we do have the 2 sketches with the other 1-way loop, but I'd suggest that as a way to solve that for this sketch, that we'd be able to put some type of divider, maybe a 2-foot strip in between the 2 driveways, so that it would no longer be considered a 2-way, keeping in mind that with this layout, we would have the channelized island for the right in only, and then the right out only. And lastly, I typically note waivers on the plan, and I don't believe I did that here. One of the waivers we would be requesting would be for parking lot size, or the parking space size, to be 9 by 18, which I believe is what is in the new Lower Merion Code, what was contemplated in the Narberth form-based zoning code, but has not yet been changed in the Narberth Subdivision and Land Development Code. It is a waiver that I know has been requested and granted in the past, as well as the parking lot aisle to be reduced from 25 feet to 22. Another one that has a waiver that's been granted in the past. So I did want to mention those two things. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Is there anyone else on your team who'd like to add anything before we start discussing the different aspects of the project? Okay. Chris, do you mind, is it possible for you to make me the host again? I realized I need to be able to mute and unmute. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, that was so sweet. That worked so well. Okay. So like I said, there's a lot to digest here, but I'd like to kind of break it down into a couple topics. First of all, I realized, just as a formality, I want to thank your team for coming here for this informational meeting. Fred, I'm sorry I didn't do that at the beginning. Vince. Secondly, just for the public at large, I did not say at the meeting, and we can discuss this more towards the end, but typically a land development process has 3 stages of review: a tentative sketch plan, preliminary plan, and a final plan. At each stage, the project comes before the Planning Commission and comes before Council for approval. A whole process can take 6, 9 months, a year longer, depending on the nature of the project. So this is the very first public meeting we've had about this. This is the tentative sketch plan phase. Based on what Mr. Fromhold said, we will be back talking about this again next in November, most likely. So this is the beginning of a long series of meetings on this project, both at the Narberth Planning Commission and Council. And as Fred alluded, we're in constant conversation with Laura Marion about how to coordinate our reviews, and there might even be joint meetings between our planning commissions. So that's a quick sketch of where we are in the process. So the first topic I'd like to kind of dig into with you, you talked about it a little, Chris, but it is the subdivision itself. And I'd like to talk about, you addressed the question about the subdivision line running through the stream course. And you noted, typically that's the way it's been done. But I'm wondering, and I'm going to ask Eric Johnson, the borough engineer, to weigh on this at some point as well. Given that the most, if not all, of the floodplain on this property lies within the borough of Narberth, would it not be in the borough's interest to have the entire floodplain be under one property ownership to make it easier for floodplain management, as opposed to split into 2, in the floodplain itself being split into 2 properties? Ask Eric, Chris, and Maggie if you have any thoughts on that. Why would the borough want its floodplain split into several properties?
So I could tell you from my perspective, my understanding is the current owners of the property, that's how they have asked for the property line to be drawn. But secondly, I think in terms of maintenance, if you draw the line down the middle, it's a little easy to maintain right up to the edge of the concrete channel. Whereas if there's any type of sliver on one side, I think it makes it a little more difficult to have to maintain, to cross the stream to maintain on the other side. We certainly could provide some type of easement that would require a shared maintenance, if that's helpful. For example, if a log came through and was blocking both sides.
Eric or Maggie, do you have thoughts about this from a floodplain management point of view? Does the borough have an interest in this being subdivided one way or another?
With respect to the floodplain, I'm not sure if the location of the property line is really going to make a distinguishable difference. You have the property line is your property boundaries. The floodplain is kind of irrespective of the property line. It's an area that's defined, that's regulated, and if it can't be built on in that area, regardless of which property it's on. So if the line goes down the center, it's not going to make an impact on the floodplain. Now, if the borough had a different reason for wanting the lot line to not be the center line of the stream, I think that is one aspect of it. But with regard to the floodplain, I don't think it makes a difference.
Well, since this would require deviation from the land development ordinance, what would the borough's interest be in deviating from its ordinance in this case? I mean, I know you're not the council, but as the borough's engineer, does it make sense for the borough to entertain that request?
So generally, I think the code section, or I think the way it's written, it's saying when feasible to create, a lot line, relatively 90 degrees in radial to the right of way. This is an irregular shaped lot to begin with. I guess there could be it could be played out to straighten out that lot line. But and maybe Chris could speak to it. I think you might end up with a line passing through the channel at an awkward angle as a possibility. I don't know where he starts getting into your lot line, your lot areas, if you start playing with that lot line.
So the county review letter did make a comment about the fact that the property line splits the channel. Because it is a channelized stream, there is a uniform structured bank on either side of that waterway. So we did raise a concern that having each of the sides of the bank in a different property could lead to maintenance issues if one side of the stream bank was maintained in a different manner than the other side of the stream bank. And in the example that Chris gave, certainly you could have a tree limb that falls over and lies on both sides of the property. So one of the recommendations we did give was to either move the lot line so that both sides of the bank are within one of the properties or another, or some kind of agreeable maintenance, access, easement, or covenant of some kind would need to be written into the deeds to allow for the maintenance for that stream bank. So that was the main concern. So there's kind of two different ways to go about it. You could leave the property line where it is, or move the property line so that the banks of the stream are in one property. But in terms of the floodplain issue, as Eric mentioned, I'm not sure that it matters necessarily as much that the bulk of the floodplain is within one of the lots or another. The stream bank, though, I think is more of a concern from a maintenance perspective, and that should be addressed through either the location of the property lines or some kind of legal maintenance agreement that goes with the properties that share those banks.
Okay. I'll ask other commissioners to follow up with questions in a minute, but there's one other question about the subdivision. It's a crazy question, but I just want to ask it so we can get it out of the way. Chris, our suspicion about how the municipal boundary came to come through the middle of the property is consistent with what you described, that the road had originally gone there and PennDOT smoothed it out, but the municipal boundary stayed. Our question is, how certain are you that that sliver of land that was created by moving the road is actually private property and not PennDOT property? Normally, I mean, what would happen if PennDOT moved a road? They would still own the old right-of-way. So how certain are you that that is actually private property as opposed to sort of a sliver of land that PennDOT owns?
So I've reviewed the deeds and the title report kind of before we got the survey, and the deeds indicated several different parcels, which then you had to piece together for the overall property. And so from that, it appeared to me that it was part of this property. And then the survey plan, confirmed that.
Does the deed indicate or the title search indicate that that property was transferred from PennDOT or from the previous property owner to this property owner?
I did not search back through the title to see, who transferred it to whom, but it is one of the parcels listed on the deed.
Okay. Do any other planning commissioners have any questions about the subdivision, the lot lines, lot configurations? because this would require, as Chris was saying, is one of the things that would require a waiver from the saldo. So that would have to be an action that council takes. I believe it would require a waiver. So do you have any other questions about the subdivision itself?
Todd, I was just going to offer that I think no matter exactly where that line or how that line is drawn, that some waiver will likely be necessary from the borough, because I think it would, the ordinance would require a single line that would be perpendicular coming from Wynwood Road. So there's likely to be a jog somewhere in it. So it would be a question of what the line looked like. But no matter what the line looks like, if it's not a straight line, probably would require a waiver, unless the determination is made that it really isn't feasible to have that line, in which case I don't think the ordinance requires that there be a single line. So if you were determined that that a straight line is not feasible, this line would not necessarily require a waiver.
Okay. Any questions from any other commissioners about this specific topic?
So I have a question. I'm Bill Cook. I'm a commissioner from Lower Merion. I'm just wondering, has any discussion been had between the borough and Lower Merion about perhaps transferring the Lower Merion portion of this site to Narberth to clean up the logistical nightmare that I see for now and the future between having a development straddling two different municipalities? And maybe it's a crazy suggestion, but it just seems to me that would make logistically things a lot easier for the future, as well as the planning of this development.
To answer your question, Commissioner, and thank you for joining us, sir. We appreciate your interest in our conversation tonight. I'm not aware of that. In any conversation I've had with the solicitor or council members or the borough staff, that's not come up. So those are the kind of conversations that occur at a higher pay grade than we are at right now. So that the only conversations that have come up is I've spoken with your planning director about holding joint planning commission meetings in the future about this, but that topic has not come up.
Well, I would imagine that Fred might have a few opinions about that happening, and I know that Chris is tuned into the meeting here, and I would just encourage those at that higher pay grade to discuss the possibility of simplifying this already very complicated development by making it exist in one municipality. I have no idea what the machinations involved would be as far as transferring that land, remuneration, whatever you want to do about it. But it just seems like it's worthy of discussion. Thanks.
Thanks for
if I could just comment and respond to that, I think that's a very good and noble idea. I just would be concerned with how long that would take and whether that would pass the time that is allotted to Mr. Falcone to obtain an approval here, unfortunately.
Fortunately, that's not an issue for us to settle ourselves. But we'll pass that suggestion along in the notes we prepare from this meeting. Are there any questions? If there are any questions from the public about this matter, about the subdivision lines, I know there are other questions here, but we will get to them later at the more appropriate time in the meeting. Type them into the chat and I'll pick them up. And this is only about questions about the subdivision lines or property boundaries. We will, while I'm waiting for those questions, if there are any, we'll move on. I think the next topic I'd like to take on is the site planning and building massing. And I think what I guess there's a lot of questions in my mind about this. But one is, Chris, if you could talk a bit more about the slopes on this site. And you talked a little bit about how the buildings will, accommodate the slopes of the site. But when I was looking at the plan, I thought it looked pretty tricky about how the vehicular egress and ingress would work with the slopes. The way the parking area, it looked like there was a run of 6 to 10 feet for the parking area. It is and I went out and looked at the site yesterday. It is a big slope. So can you talk more about how you're addressing the slope and those features of the development?
Yes, would it be okay if I share my screen again?
Yeah, I'll transfer over to you if I can remember how to do that. You should be able to do that now.
Okay. Okay, can you see my screen?
I can see it, yeah.
Okay, so this is the second sheet of the plan set, which includes, actually, before I do that, I'm going to go to the third page. So, and I'm going to zoom pretty far in here just so you can see the difference. We have 3 different slope patterns on the plan. This double crosshatch are slopes that are 25% and greater, which are obviously all the way up here through the train tracks. And as the embankment from the train tracks gets closer and closer to the property line and eventually kind of into the property, that's where there's some 25% slopes. The next range we have are 15 to 25% slopes with this crosshatch, and then the 10 to 15 with the crosshatch going the other direction. Those are some slope boundaries that the Lower Merion Code asks that we show on the plan. So you can see some of those through the site. Again, the 25% and greater up here, but yes, there are some 15 to 25, a couple ranges, and then some other 10 to 15. So then if I go back to this second page, we're not required to have all of the, or I guess my understanding of a tentative sketch phase is mostly to get the building location and driveways, access, dumpsters, loading, things like those considered, not necessarily all of the grading and stormwater and erosion controls yet. However, we are supposed to consider that. And so we did show some spot elevations on this plan. We put some approximate floor elevations for each building. And then for this driveway, basically out at the street, here's the 261 contour line. And so we have a 261 spot shot back here where the buildings are together. It slopes very gently to the back of the buildings at 260.3. I worked hard to get a relationship between the two buildings. There was not more than a 5% slope so that you could walk out of this building, come over to this handicap parking space, which can't be more than 2%, and then slope back up to 5% again to get into this building so that there wouldn't be any ramps from one building and handicap parking space back to the other. Now, as that relates to the rest of the buildings, that's what makes this left half of lot 3 or the unit 3 building is tucked into the embankment a little bit. And so we show some spout elevations just to push a swale around. This covered parking, or on the other sketch, there is a wall behind the parking that in the beginning is holding back some of the earth. And then at some point as we pass through here, we're starting to hold up the parking. And so we are showing a wall around basically this side, if you can follow the little hand of the parking, to hold that up above the floodplain. You can see some new contour lines. We chose to put these in here because there were several, and I thought it would help show the difference in grade, where we're grading from 250 up to 258, getting a little closer to the second floor level of this building. So we have done a preliminary scheme of grading to show how each of these buildings would fit on the site and how you would access each and the parking. So basically from the rear of these buildings, there would be no steps to the parking area. The front of the buildings, we have a front entrance going to the sidewalk. In both cases, there would be some steps right at the sidewalk. either going up or going down. But then we have a little flared section of sidewalk that gets a little closer to, the middle, or I'll call average grade in the middle, so that would also be handicap accessible. There wouldn't be any steps on those angles. And I guess since I'm talking about grading, and I'm sure there are many questions about stormwater, if you don't mind, I'll talk about that quickly. We show this red line is what we're calling an approximate drainage area line that would show that we plan to collect all of the drainage from the roofs of both buildings. This is some offsite area from the railroad tracks, all of the parking area, and the driveway in between. That would either be piped to the stormwater. This box is an approximate size for a stormwater system. It would either be piped there through downspouts, rainwater conductors, and we show one inlet here on the low side of the parking area where this drains down. We collect it there, put it into the stormwater system. We would design that system to meet the codes, would be the intent, which require a portion of infiltration and a portion of rate control. And so what wouldn't be infiltrated, there'd be an overflow out to, we're showing a level spreader just above the floodplain line in this location. Did that help answer your, and actually, if you don't mind, if I could say one more thing. I know that the Lower Merion Planning Commission members have to leave in a few minutes here for their meeting. I also have a project on their agenda, not the first, but the second. So it's okay. I might have to leave quickly for that project, which I hope will be short, and then could come back on. But I think with most of the presentation part of it done, I think the rest of the team here is very capable of answering the rest of the questions.
Okay. We'll do our best to make sure you can fulfill your responsibilities for both meetings tonight, Chris. Like I said to you on the phone, thankfully you're on Zoom. You don't have to go from building to building.
Yeah.
But, looking at the parking area, the 13 spots there in the trash, I mean, the way I'm reading it, that's a 10-foot grade for those parking spots between the trash, the left-hand side, or the west and the east. Isn't that quite a grade for such a short distance in a parking lot?
It is. So from this left-hand side is somewhere around 262.5 at this entrance, to down on this side is 255. So it's about 7.5 feet from one side to the other. But we do show this slope arrow here of 5%, which is I typically like to get a parking lot somewhere between 1 and 5%. Certainly there are times when we go above that, and both codes would permit more, but we were trying to keep it at a reasonable amount.
Mm-hmm. And can you, I wish we could see, I do think being able to see some kinds of sections or elevations that kind of give us a sense of how this lays in the land is going to be important to us, being certain that the site planning actually works. It's hard to imagine how this works three-dimensionally. I respect your trying to explain. Another question related to that, slide to the buildings for a second, and I'll make sure the planning commissioners have a chance to ask a question, is how you've calculated the building heights. I believe the borough, you probably did not have a chance. Kevin Walsh sent a letter over this afternoon questioning, wanting further information about how the building heights were calculated. And I tried to replicate the work you did, and myself felt that some of the extreme elevations, at the low, as you know, in Norberth, we use the edge of the property as the benchmark for, the datum to create the line from which you measure the height. And I just couldn't see the actual contours of this property reflected in your calculations. So could you walk us through how you've calculated the building height for these two buildings?
Sure. So these calculations on the left here, and we've done it a couple ways. This is showing the average grade around the Lot 2 building. And so the way that we've done this calculation is you we basically take a distance at an elevation, and we multiply the distance times the elevation. And we do that all the way around the building. And then we divide by the total distance to get the average elevation. That's a standard way to do the calculation when the code asks for the average grade around the building. I do know that, the Narberth code is a little tricky. They also ask for elevations at the front facade, and they look at that in terms of where the floor elevation should be. I'm not sure I dove deeply enough into this in terms of the zoning, but the way I've looked at this is that if this is the municipal boundary, that the setbacks for Lower Merion apply on the Lower Merion side, and the setbacks for Narberth apply on the Narberth side. And so, in the front yard setback is determined from Lower Merion. Similarly, I don't believe Lower Merion has a regulation on where the first floor height has to be relative to the existing grade, which I know Narberth does, but I'm viewing that as not applicable since the front of the buildings aren't in Narberth. I do know that we've gone through this on another project that I feel the Narberth code is unclear, where at one point it talks about what the first floor elevation should be relative to the grade along the front facade. At another point, it talks about the height of the building being measured from the average grade, but then in the definition for the height, it mixes the two together. And so on another project, to make it easier, we showed that it worked both ways. I haven't done that here, partly because I don't think that what happens along the front facade is applicable to Narberth. So I've shown the average grade around the building, and then we show what the maximum peak would be. I think we need to, at this tentative sketch phase, we don't have 100% architectural plans to go through all those calculations. That's definitely something we need later, but at this time we're not anticipating any variances from the height.
Okay. Can you review your calculations for the building coverage, so we understand how you arrived at that? I think there were questions about that as well.
I think there was an inconsistency between the calculation and the number in the chart. Basically, Lower Merion does not have a building coverage limitation. They do have an impervious coverage. Narberth has both building and impervious. And so for the Narberth portion of the site, we took the portion of the building in Narberth and divided by the area in Narberth to get the percentage. And we showed some calculations at the bottom here of similar to how it was in the zoning officer's letter, with where the first 4,000 square feet of lot area, you take 55%, and above that, you get an additional 5% to come up with the total. And so I didn't have a chance to rectify the inconsistency because I did just see this letter this afternoon, but it is again, that's something we intend to comply with. Did not intend to request for variance. So I think that's just me needing to clarify the inconsistency.
All right, sorry, I'm busy trying to look at these numbers myself. Can you talk about, while I look at that, can you also talk about the, I know the distance of the frontage, there's a discrepancy between Lower Merion's code, which is clear about that, and our code, which actually isn't clear about that. But can you talk about, we have a requirement for a frontage type, like the way the building addresses the street. Can you talk about what frontage type that you would propose to include in this building? The porch enclosed, maybe.
I don't have the answer to that at this time. I don't know if someone else from my team could help answer that in terms of what frontage type would be. I would say again that, you know, the front of the building is in Lower Marion Township and not in Narberth. And so as I tried to, you can see the zoning charts here for each lot, as I tried to, you know, marry the two and try to comply with every section that I could. And I should say the intent here is to comply with both codes and not go to the zoning hearing board of either. And so as we get comments that come up, my intent is to address those. Hopefully we don't get to a point where there's one that I can address either because the codes conflict or because it just doesn't work with the sketch. But that frontage type was something I viewed as not applicable because the frontage is in Lower Marion and not Narberth.
Well, yeah, okay. As you know, what we're here to assess is, you know, how well this development works for Narberth. And well, I'm not sure exactly how those places where the codes differ will be resolved. Certainly, it would help us if those aspects of our code, even if it's part of the property that's in Lower Marion, could be considered. Maggie, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute. I'm trying to search the notes here about the building coverage. My recollection is that the building coverage exceeded what our building coverage allows. Is that something you picked up in your review of this? I'm sorting through all my papers here and can't quite.
It is. Chris, did you have?
Yeah, if I could, so it did exceed it, and that's because we weren't considering the covered parking. And so by taking the covered parking out of the building coverage, or basically off of the plan, I believe that we will comply with the building coverage calculation.
Okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So in my review letter, I did touch on the building coverage. So I guess this is, I haven't compared Kevin's review letter to mine yet because he also calculated the building coverage, but in my letter, I commented that just the buildings themselves, the residential buildings, and not considering the covered parking area, since I don't believe that we had calculations for that. The percent, let's see. So each building has an overall footprint of 5,400 square feet. And the portion of the building on lot 2 is 5,139 square feet. So pretty much I had calculated the building coverage limits based on the total lot area, but then also based on the percentage of the lot within Narberth, and then tried to come up with the calculations for both. And in both cases, the building coverage exceeds the limitations set by the Narberth zoning code. So when we take a look at the percentage of the building permitted on the portion of the lot within Narberth alone, and when we take a look at the building coverage limits based on the portion of the lot, if we were to consider the lot as a whole. So the end result is essentially these buildings appear to be much larger. The footprint of the building appears to be much larger than would be permissible by the Narberth zoning code. So those were the original calculations I had, and I did include that in my review letter from September 10th. So I can go through that in more detail, unless we have any, if there's any need for it. But that was the conclusion that I came to. And then I did make the comment that the covered garages would also count as building coverage, which was not originally included in the building coverage calculations, which would add, of course, additional building coverage to that. But it seems that that may be coming off of the plan. So if covered parking does stay in, we would just ask that the calculations be accounted for in the total building coverage.
So if they eliminate the garage, though, it appears building, well, I guess Maggie, your observation is that the building coverage numbers don't quite work yet, whether you calculate them as only the portion in Narberth or whether you consider the whole property to be in Narberth, that the building footprints are bigger than we would normally allow.
Right, and I did see there was a question here, how much larger? I'm assuming that's asking. So each of the buildings is 5,400 square feet. So in some cases, depending again on if you calculate it based on the total lot area or the lot area within Narberth exclusively, we're looking at an excess of 2,000 to 2,500 square feet for both lots.
Each or together? Be careful. Each.
So the calculation for lot 2, which is the larger of the two lots, the maximum based on the area within the borough alone would cap out at 3,619 square feet. So that's just under 2,000 less than what's being proposed. And then the calculation for lot 3, again, based on the area within the borough exclusively, is 2,492. So that's actually 3,000 less than what is being proposed. So in essence, these buildings are almost twice as large as what would be permitted under a regular, not a regular lot, but a lot that's within this district within Narberth. And again, that's just based on the calculations for the lot, the portion of the lot in Narberth.
I was just going to comment on that. I think if you are applying the code requirement, it applies to a lot area. And I think it would be appropriate to consider the entirety of the lot area and not appropriate to break it down into Lower Merion lot area versus Narberth lot area. But it
Sure.
would seem
So
to, it would
in
seem
that
to me
case,
the question then would be whether, if you look at it in that fashion, whether we comply or we don't comply, as I think you're suggesting, even with that.
Yeah, so the lot area, okay, so based on the calculation for the total lot area, exclusive of which portion of the lot is in which municipality. So based on the calculations for the total lot area, lot 2 would permit a maximum of 3,870 square feet building coverage. Again, you're proposing 5,400. And for lot 3, based on the total lot area, the maximum permitted is 2,774 square feet. So again, that is less than what is being proposed. So in either case, based on the total lot area or the area of the lot within the borough, the maximum building coverage is being exceeded.
For lot?
Both
for
lots
both
2
lots.
and 3.
Chris would be the one to address that, and I see he's just stuck away for a moment.
You actually, so on the site plan that you submit, you actually do have those numbers shown. So under the notes at the bottom of the site plan, note number 2, you do have the calculations listed for lot 2 and lot 3. There was a minor discrepancy in numbers, but again, it still shows that lot 2, the maximum building coverage is 3,619 square feet, and the maximum building coverage for lot 3 is 2,492 square feet. So you show right here in your plans what the building limits are, and then you're proposing 5,400.
So I need to relook at that. My recollection of what we did was that we took the area in Narberth. So for lot 3, for example, took the area in Narberth, you'd multiply times, you take the first 4,000 out, and that would be multiplied times 55%. And then the remaining you would multiply times 5% to get what else is allowable. And you get the total number. And then the area that we use to divide is just the portion of the building in Narberth. And so I didn't have a chance to check those numbers now. I was just going to go to my third computer here that I have open to try to look at that. I didn't have a chance yet, but that's what I thought that we did. I knew that the covered parking was pushing us over the limit. I see here that these are 4,777 square feet per floor. So I'm not sure if there's a discrepancy, and there was a 5,000 number at one point, but I'll clarify that. And the intent is to meet the code. So if it turns out that something is wrong, then I have to deal with that.
Yeah, so I guess the question mainly was just, so it seems that the numbers have changed based on what I had originally calculated from the original site plans that I was reviewing. So the question really is consistency across the board in that is everything being measured based on the percentage of that feature in each municipality? And in that case, you should apply it uniformly. So the issue that I had in reviewing the calculations provided was it seemed that at some point, some of the calculations were being based off of the percentage of the lot in each municipality, while others were being aggregated over the entire lot area as a whole. So I think that the thing to simplify is if we can do all of our calculations in the same way and then show those calculations so that everyone can verify. Although Mr. Fromhold, you just said that lot area should be calculated based on the total lot area. So again, I don't know what the best solution would be here, except I think consistency in application of ordinance language would be key to determine compliance for each municipal ordinance standard.
We appreciate your bringing all this up. We will need to put all of it under the microscope and make sure that we are consistent in approach.
I think the one that I struggled with was the density requirement, because where I can easily cut the line for an impervious coverage or a building coverage, I can't easily cut the units. So I'd have a strange portion of a unit here and here, and so for simplicity of that, I used the overall lot area and showed that the density worked for both Lower Merion and Narberth.
Right, so that again was the inconsistency, because if we take the lot area for just Narberth, the Narberth code requires that you can have up to 5 units in a multifamily house, but you have to provide 3,000 square feet per unit, which would be, so 12, I'm sorry, let me pull up my notes again. I lost my review letter. So if we look at the density.
You're right. I guess the difficulty I would have is that if I take just the area in Narberth, and I say, okay, if that is, let's just call it 10,000 square feet, I forget what it is, and that equates to 3.3 units, then how do I show that I have 3.3 units here if they're not split equally?
Right.
And so the only way I would know to do that is to basically take a percentage of each unit and say, okay, for units 1, 3, and 5, I have 0.4 parts of them, and for units 2 and 4, I have 0.62 parts, and then I average it. So that was the one that was a little more difficult than all the others.
Right. Yeah. So for example, lot 3, The gross area of the lot is 22,775 square feet. So if we're saying 3,000 square feet by 5 units, it's 15,000 square feet required for 5 units. But there's only 9,833 square feet within Narberth alone. So right, as you said, it would end up being like just over 3 units. But in a building, you can't really split them up that way. So again, that was being shown as being compliant based on the total lot area, but not everything was being based off of the total lot area. So I guess it really boils down to how the people who decide whether or not these are compliant, if the rationale for applying different standards to different calculation methods to different standards is applicable and makes sense. But yes, that was another one that did come up in my review letter as well, was I believe you might meet the density, the square footage area required for the 5 unit density for lot 2, but lot 3, you were under it. Again, just based off the total Narberth net area, not the total lot area.
Chris, I don't want to interrupt the train of thought, but I do. Dave Brower is waiting to be let into the meeting, and since you're the host.
No, I am.
You're in the meeting? Okay.
And now in. I apologize for my tardiness, little technological problem.
Okay. Well, we're glad you're here now. As you know, I'm hopefully, Chris and Fred and the rest of your team, I'm characterizing this correctly. The municipal planning code does not provide crystal clear guidance on how these situations are to be handled, except to say that the 2 municipalities sort of have to work out an agreement as to how they're handled. And you and I have talked with them, and I've talked to our solicitor and our borough council, and there are at least 3 different ways that I'm aware of looking at this. But I think the way I would urge you to look at it is, even if for some reason it's determined the letter of our code does not apply in Lower Merion, certainly the spirit of our code applies in South Narberth. And I think it would be important for you to think about what is the spirit of the code trying to convey for the kinds of new development that Narberth thinks is appropriate in South Narberth. Because I think that if the signals are that what you're proposing is not consistent with the intent of our code, even if the code doesn't technically apply to a sliver of your lot, I think that, I suspect that will be looked at in a very, very difficult and challenging way. So I think it's not just about meeting the letter of the law methodologically, it's also about meeting the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. And so I'd urge you to think about that when you're thinking about how you analyze this. I mean, I think in the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish, the building footprints are bigger than what we would expect to see in this part of Narberth. And so I think that that's going to be, I'm glad you're willing to go back and look at that issue, but that's certainly going to be a key issue that we're going to want to look at more closely as we go through this process. Maggie, are there any other site planning or urban design building massing issues that you think are important to bring up? And then I'll ask the commissioners if they have questions as well.
Sure. So we had touched briefly on kind of the architectural details. The way that the Narberth Code is written, the multifamily house essentially is supposed to look like a regular single-family detached residential structure. It's not necessarily supposed to look like a mid-rise condo or apartment building. So I know that those details aren't necessarily worked out, and I know that the frontage is in Lower Merion. I believe, though, that Lower Merion standards also have a certain requirement for frontage type. So that is listed on the site plans. So I know in the sense of having things like porches. In terms of setbacks, I had made comments just about the rear setbacks and having the portion of the structure. So Chris touched on this earlier, but the Narberth Code, when we look at the rear setbacks, do have stricter requirements for setbacks from a structure than is being shown. So right now, I believe it's about 3 feet from the edge of the covered parking garage, or not parking garage, but the edge of the covered parking area to the rear lot line, which should be deeper according to the Narberth standards. As Chris mentioned, though, the edge of that property line is the beginning of the embankment up to the railroad tracks above the site. So in the sense of kind of the impact that would have, but according to the letter of the law, they don't meet the side or the rear setbacks with the inclusion of the covered parking area. There was a couple of questions about how lot width was calculated as well. And I don't know if that was based on, again, the portion of the lot that's in Lower Merion versus the portion of the lot that's in Narberth, because at some point, Chris, can you scroll down to the edge of lot 2, kind of where the property boundary, so you can see where the lot line is being measured at that setback line. The municipal boundary kind of crosses over. So are you able to clarify for us if the lot width was calculated as, again, that full lot width, or was it just based on the lot width within each of the municipalities?
I believe I was only calculating it for Lower Merion Township and going at the setback line, basically from the property line to the municipal boundary. But I can confirm that and show a dimension on the plan.
Okay, yeah, because again, based on the, I know that you're saying that the Narberth Code doesn't apply in this case because the frontage is in Lower Merion, but again, in terms of if it meets Narberth has a requirement that building frontage width does not exceed 42 feet, and it appears these buildings are going to be 80 feet wide. So again, just the scale of the building is in excess of what would be allowed in this district if it had been entirely within Narberth. I had some comments about side setbacks. We already discussed building coverage. I just mentioned the frontage build out. So in terms of the other kind of dimensional standards, I think we've covered the majority of the ones that I raised in my letter. And so really it's just a matter of, again, applying how the different codes are being applied in terms of which codes are being applied on which portion of the lot and how it's all being calculated, and that should be uniform, or some explanation provided as to how the calculations were achieved. So I think, Todd, that sums up my kind of dimensional standard requirement or comments.
Okay. Do any planning commissioners have any questions about the site planning, the building massing, building form, setbacks, things like that? Or comments you'd like to make at this point?
I'd like to say that we don't know enough without seeing some more studies of elevations and that sort of thing.
Jim, specifically, I know Todd had mentioned cross sections. If there's anything in particular that would be helpful, if we could be advised of that, we would like to be able to consider that.
Well, the essence of our code, Fred, is that the form of the building is what we are concerned about more than anything else. We're arguing about how many feet, inches, and fractions of inches are shown on an engineering site plan, but in the reality of this building, it'll be experienced in terms of what it looks like as people drive down Wynwood Road. So I would want to see evidence of that before becoming comfortable with the site plan. The site plan worries me a little bit. The buildings are too big and they're too close to the street. It's as simple as that. So there may be ways of mitigating that by deft handling of the elevations, but I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, and you can imagine the challenge here of trying to get a plan that complies from a zoning point of view, substantially from a subdivision point of view, and And then the design point of view is it's a chicken egg type of challenge for sure.
Absolutely.
Comments from other planning commissioners?
I have some. Can you hear me, Todd?
Yes.
I have a question that I haven't really been able to look into on my own yet, but it has to do with the parking in the rear, surface parking in the rear. I'm not aware of any other residential surface parking that is shared across a lot line. And I know I believe we have provisions for commercial shared parking, but not residential. And here we have, I mean, on paper, it's two separate surface lots, but they flow into each other seamlessly. And even a number of parking spots straddle the lot line. I wonder how that's dealt with in terms of setback. Like how can you set back part of a parking space or part of a surface lot from the lot line if the lot line runs straight through it? How is that handled?
Can I just clarify, Jim? Unless I'm mistaken, the code does allow for parking spaces to be shared among uses on the same or adjoining lots if it meets the standards of shared parking. So if it meets certain standards, it is allowable. But your question is a good one. How's it managed?
I would just like to say one thing. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so I guess in response to what Jim was just talking about, if this isn't covered, that wouldn't apply. If it's covered, Jim's concerns would apply.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. But I'd also like to agree with what Jim Cornwell was saying about the form of these buildings. I mean, it's a very strange situation, as we all know, being partly in Lower Merion and the front of the buildings being in Lower Merion, but clearly from an aesthetic point of view, coming down Wynwood, you're still in Narberth. It's still part of the Narberth fabric. And the right thing to do would be to develop these buildings as if they're continuing the row of homes that are on Wynwood. The 42-foot width should apply. The lot coverage, the area of the buildings should apply, and the form of the building. They should look like houses, as Maggie said. And that's what concerns me the most, is that just because part of it is in Lower Merion, I mean, in the Lower Merion Code, the district that these are in Lower Merion says, I think it's regarding this district, they have to look like buildings that are in the adjacent areas or in the surrounding area. And perhaps you could say across the street there's an apartment complex, and so therefore these would fit in. They look much more like the apartments than like a multifamily house. And so I'd be really concerned about that. And I would hope that Lower Merion would look at it that way, especially since they spent so much time putting together their form zoning code recently. And there ought to be some way to, sort of dictate how these buildings, the form, the massing, slope aside, just how they look on the site.
And I would add too a concern about the front yard setback. I think that also needs to be consistent with the borough code.
I think that is just an area where there's actually a clear conflict with Lower Merion's code, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So, it's just an informational point in terms of what Lower Merion requires. It would be interesting to ask, and we can do this when we have a joint meeting with Lower Merion. If they, I don't even know if they understood this was part of their municipality. The letter from the MCPC to the Lower Merion staff seems to indicate this area wasn't actually even included. Some of their planning, and whether they actually really gave this much thought when they mapped it the way they did. So that will be a conversation we can take up with the Lower Merion planning commissioners and staff when we have a joint meeting with them. But I think what you're hearing overall is despite the kind of peculiarity of having to address two code requirements, the requirements that Narberth has and its goals for South Narberth are pretty clear. And on first blush, in a lot of ways, this development doesn't seem to meet what our intention was when we created the form-based code for South Narberth. I'm going to ask anyone in the public who has a question about this topic, more of an informational question, to upload it, and we'll handle it through the chat. That way we'll open it up for public comment a little later. But and I have been answering some questions in the chat that come up in the chat. But if you have questions, upload them that way. If I could, unless there's other questions from...
Yeah. Yeah, I want to ask about the sloped roof requirement. I haven't heard much about that in the design. I know we don't have elevations yet, but I'd like to ask the applicants if and how they're going to implement the sloped roofs of these structures.
Would anybody?
Ed Zernacki here.
Yeah. Hello.
We haven't been, we've considered the sloped roofs and complying with the Narberth code. But because it's in Lower Merion right now, we're not sure that they would go along with it. That's one of the reasons why we would like we're doing the presentation to you and Lower Merion, so there can be some municipal agreement as to which codes we're trying to achieve or trying to comply with. But a preliminary vision is to make it look residential and not like a commercial low-rise apartment building. And we've done some sketches on Narberth sloped roofs, and we may have some ideas on that, but until we hear from Lower Merion, we're not sure what to present yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say my inclination is to say that where you can conform with both codes and produce a proposal that you feel is consistent with the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish in each municipality, that's what you should do. And if there's a conflict in the codes that keeps you from accomplishing what you think is a good outcome, then that's where, you know, we useful to flag that conflict, and that's where we can focus when we work with Lower Merion on this. That's what I'll be asking the planning commissioners to do.
Thank you.
Are there other questions from planning commissioners about the urban design or the site planning? Eric, if we missed any comments, or Maggie, we already asked Maggie. Eric, if we missed any comments from you or questions from you on this topic, I know it's not normally what you focus on, but I want to make sure you have a chance. Okay. Did you have anything, Eric?
No, my only comment I had in my letter with regard to the zoning and the building was that the zoning officers in Narberth and Lower Merion should be in coordination, maybe with a unified idea of how we want to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Let's talk about stormwater management. More about the floodplain. Maybe the best way, Eric, if this puts you on the spot, let me know, but maybe the best way is for you to kind of lead us to the questions you had about the floodplain, about stormwater management. Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, so I guess there's two aspects, I guess, with the water. There's the floodplain, and then there would be the stormwater management associated with the development. I'll speak to the stormwater first. Any development that would occur in the borough or really anywhere in the Commonwealth would have to comply with the stormwater management requirements, be that infiltration of water, managing the flow, peak rate reduction, and that would be irregardless of any development that occurs. At this point, as Chris was pointing out in his plans, there is a preliminary idea of what system would be installed and how it would manage the stormwater. That will be fleshed out in future submissions as we're going through the process and be reviewed. With regard to the floodplain, so as Chris had mentioned, this property is partly within the Borough Floodplain Conservation District, which is tied directly to the FEMA floodplain. FEMA defines the boundaries of a 100-year floodplain on this property. And there's different ways that FEMA defines a floodplain. They define it with they tell you where the boundaries are and they tell you what the base flood elevation is, or they define the boundary, but they don't give you the base flood elevation. So what the applicant is proposing to do as part of this development is to adjust the location of the floodplain boundaries. And to do that, you have to go through the whole floodplain study and actually calculate that base flood elevation. The applicant had prepared a study and it was submitted to us for review, as he was saying. And based on that, we provided some technical comments back to the applicant after reviewing the study that would potentially have an impact on the revised location of the floodplain. So the applicant's currently working through those technical comments and they'll be coming back to us with the revised study. And for us to review, and ultimately, once we're comfortable as the borough's professionals, they then would have to submit to FEMA to get FEMA sign off. So, if the floodplain boundary is revised, it will be based on the technical modeling of the floodplain, and then that would be approved locally and on the federal level. And if the numbers show that it can be changed from the current location, then that's what the numbers show. And the borough's floodplain conservation district and all the requirements are tied directly to that FEMA established floodplain. So it's currently going through the process of establishing that. And we'll see what their next submission has to say about it.
Is Chris Yohan on the call, or is he off at Lower Merion right now?
Chris left about 10 minutes ago to go to Lower Merion, so hopefully he'll be back before too long.
Okay.
Todd, I think it's also important to note, so Eric mentioned the borough's floodplain management ordinance. So both in his review letter and in my review letter, we did comment that there is a requirement that says no new construction or development shall be located within an area measured 50 feet landward from the top of bank of any water course, unless a variance has been obtained from the borough and a permit has been obtained from the Department of Environmental Protection. So Chris covered this in the original overview of the site. So the parking area towards the rear of the site is actually located within, I believe, about 30 to 35 feet from the top of that stream embankment, which is within the 50-foot boundary. So that's something that has not been addressed, but that is a requirement within the borough's floodplain management ordinance. And that portion of the site is wholly within Narberth, would be where the impact of the proximity of the building and the parking area. I believe it's just the parking area that would be within that 50 feet, but that is a standard within the borough's floodplain management ordinance.
So the only thing I would add to that is, Maggie is correct. That is requirement. The specifics of that, it says within the floodplain conservation district, and if the floodplain conservation district is defined as the FEMA floodplain, if the FEMA floodplain is extending less than 50 feet to one side of the creek, then that's going to be the edge where I think that's applicable. But as Maggie's saying, unless that line is changed, the floodplain line, we currently have a piece of the parking lot in the floodplain conservation district, and that may or may not change depending on the outcome of the flood study. I think that is the objective. Well, everything they're proposing would be outside the flood study. The engineering just has to be completed, to back that up.
I didn't realize Chris was off the call when we switched to this topic, and I think it would be better to pick this topic up when he's back on the call. So if we could hold that, and I know there's a couple of questions from the public which we would ask. I think it's better for Chris to be around when we ask the question. So if it's okay, which is connection to Wynwood Road, site circulation, the access egress driveway questions. Frank Tavani is on the line to discuss those. Let me see if I can. You know what? Frank, are you able to unmute yourself?
I certainly am.
Great. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
There are, I guess there's one option for this, which is in the most recently submitted designs, and then there's another option that you informally showed us this evening of two one-way entries and one-way entry and one-way egress. So let's talk about these two options. First one, Eric, were you able to take a look at that other option before this meeting, or is that the first you saw it? What's your take on the code aside? What are your take? I mean, we don't allow a two-way driveway in this zoning district, whether it's for shared parking or not. What's your take on this? What's the project?
Your question kind of broke up there. Can you say that again?
Share with everyone the comments you've made on this aspect of the project, the driveway access.
Right. So I think there's two pieces going. There is the borough requirement that doesn't allow the two-way driveways in the zoning district. That's one piece. The other section the other component has to do with the actual configuration of how this property will connect to Wynwood Road, and that's with respect to the road, the curvature of the road, the turning lane that exists, and the proximity to the stoplight. And there have been some preliminary conversations between Narberth, Lower Merion, and then also they started seeking out comment from PennDOT as East Wynwood Road is a PennDOT road. So I think these other proposed revisions were geared more towards complying or dealing with potential traffic issues and safety issues with the connection to the road. So I think Frank probably can speak a little more to where they've gotten to at this point. But there's a few different parties, Lower Merion and PennDOT both being two of the main ones that would need to really get the buy-in and agree upon how the entrance to the property would be installed.
Yes, I believe Eric summarized that quite aptly. We believe we can make either option work. There are, of course, pros and cons to either layout. With the one-way pair, as I'm calling it, where you have the entrance driveway further away from the traffic signal, the fact that it is further away from the traffic signal affords you potentially somewhat less concern about westbound traffic that is passing the site and approaching the traffic signal, occasionally stopping and perhaps extending to or beyond the site entrance point. If that were to happen and someone tried to, for example, turn left into the site at the same time as that stopped queue of traffic in the westbound direction was present, then there could be, some slight difficulty in any traffic moving until the westbound traffic begins to flow again. So the further that you get away from that traffic signal, the less likely that is to occur, and therefore there could be a perceived benefit with the one-way pair option. Now, having said that, as we all know, we're talking about a comparatively small site here. With 10 total attached housing units, the trip generation is quite low. It's basically single-digit volume in either direction during either peak hour. So the likelihood of there being this, potential hypothetical queue situation arising is quite small. Of course, that is possible. So if we move further away from the signal, it does afford a small benefit. But we have to weigh that benefit against the fact that now we have a road. That road may have a small retaining wall along most of its length that will create potentially greater separation from the residents of the site and the green space to the east of the building. It might make it harder to enjoy that natural feature, for example. So, part of the reason why we're here tonight is to share the honest feedback we have with PennDOT and with the township, and of course the borough staff, but also to seek out everyone's opinion about whether or not there is a preference so that we can work in that direction. As Eric said, PennDOT did talk with me. I spoke with Susan LaPenta at PennDOT. I circulated an email following a conversation with her, with borough staff, and it says basically what I just told you, that they do have a preference for the one-way pair, but they believe that either option is workable.
Can you have you calculated the difference in impervious surface coverage between the two options?
Well, you have transitioned back into a question that's probably best handled in the wheelhouse of the good Mr. Yohan, who has stepped away briefly, as we know.
Todd, I think Chris did calculate that, and if my recollection is correct, it was a few hundred square feet more with the one-way circulation.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it was a great difference.
That's my recollection as well. There was an increase, but it was surprisingly small.
Any planning commissioners have questions or comments about this topic?
Sure. Well, like everyone's been saying, that we don't allow two-way driveways in Narberth. And I think the reason for that, or one of the primary reasons in my mind, is that, again, we don't want structures in this zone to read as complexes. We don't want them to appear to be apartment complexes or give the impression of being apartment complexes. So two-way driveways, I would say, are just, they're inconsistent with the intent of the form code, and regardless of whether they're better or worse traffic flow wise, I don't think they should be considered. Or I don't know if it's been mentioned specifically. We do allow shared driveways, but again, those can't be two-way driveways, and they need to be. I would not like to see anything more than a 12-foot single direction driveway in or out of this property.
Other planning commissioners with comments about that?
I agree with Jim Spear. I mean, I don't really, given what Frank was saying about the amount of traffic expected, I think a single width driveway should it sounds like it should be adequate, that you don't need an in and an out driveway.
Well, to be clear, we certainly have to have, we need to provide for both entering and exiting traffic. What I was trying to articulate is, with a relatively low number of trips, really either of these options will work in terms of the likelihood of queues periodically blocking driveways and other traffic not being able to proceed because of that. It's something unlikely in the extreme to take place. However, in fairness, the one-way pair option, which translates the entering movements further east, has a lesser likelihood of having those challenges.
I guess
Todd,
I would, again,
go ahead, Eric.
go ahead, Maggie.
I
Okay.
was so tonight was the first night that I had seen the alternate driveway pairing myself, but just a few thoughts as I'm listening to the conversation to consider as we make decisions about the driveway. Certainly the movement of the entrance, the ingress, further away from the intersection and further away from the curve of the road there is more ideal. As Mr. Tavani is saying, so we'll pull that further away from the intersection, which is something that we raised at the county level as being of a concern. So that could be beneficial. The other question that I would want to raise is about the access for emergency vehicles. So if the fire department, police department want to weigh in on this, if they have a preference for the size of their vehicles maneuvering into and out of the site, given the two different driveway configurations, could be something to consider. It seems, at least from a routine maintenance with having a trash truck come, it might be easier for them to have the circular circulation of this one way in, one way out, rather than performing multiple backing up movements. We also have 10 units here, so there's a greater likelihood that we'll see certainly at the beginning when people are all moving in, we'll have a lot of larger delivery trucks, plus any online ordering and other mail delivery packages. So we'll have a number of larger vehicles entering and exiting the site on a regular basis. So in terms of showing truck turning templates and those types of movements would be important as well to understand how those types of vehicles will be able to access the site. And then finally, just thinking about the streetscape opportunities and potential challenges of incorporating now either one larger driveway entrance and exit or having two smaller ones in terms of how that would impact the pedestrian experience and safety for pedestrians crossing over this roadway. So again, it seems that the traffic volumes will be low in terms of how many vehicles are going to be entering and exiting the site. But I would imagine that since there is no outdoor amenities for folks living here, they'll be accessing Narberth Park frequently. If they take the train, they'll be walking to one of the train stations. So there will be pedestrians, greater number of pedestrians along this portion of Wynwood Road than we typically see. So just in terms of creating a design that's going to be sensitive to those safety needs of those roadway users as well, who are going to be walking on the sidewalks there. So just a couple things to keep in the back of everyone's mind as we go through this. But I think especially the truck turning templates might be a helpful way to understand the impacts of the two different driveway configurations, and perhaps that could help determine what might be more suitable for the site.
Maggie, just so that I understand, from a pedestrian experience point of view, your preference would be a single entry, 12-foot wide, if you will, driveway, and then a 12-foot wide driveway exiting between the buildings. That would be better than having the in and out driveway between the buildings, if they're restricted movements.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if there's one benefit, because at one point you have the paired, don't want to, the double wide essentially is one point. So pedestrians will know that vehicles are only entering and exiting on that site. And then drivers will also know that they should be aware of pedestrians crossing over this. So essentially we're creating one conflict point versus two conflict points of pedestrians and vehicles entering and exiting the site. Certainly having a shorter crossing distance might be better. But either way, I think just having some, painted crosswalks, and then you may also consider ADA curb ramps on either side of each of your driveway entrances. So if you have two separate driveway entrances, and that's 4 ADA curb ramps and 2 painted crosswalks over, or some other kind of design to provide increased visibility for pedestrians crossing over this driveway entrance. So again, I don't necessarily know that I have a preference or would recommend at this point a preference for a wider driveway. I think it comes as a package deal in terms of what's more efficient for the site as a whole, and then providing appropriate pedestrian amenities to make sure that we have the safest sidewalk experience as we can, given the driveway configurations.
Understood. Yep.
Just so if you're not reading in the chat, there's a concern about a one-way driveway for two-way traffic at this particular location that someone has mentioned.
Yeah, I would just would clarify, I guess, before Maggie jumped in, regardless of the configuration, one location or two locations, you're gonna have to have two driveways, one that allows for vehicles to come in, and one aisle that allows for vehicles to come out. In any configuration, you're not going to be able to have one 12-foot wide driveway serving the property.
Right.
Eric, could you have one driveway serving each property? I mean, if this were a house.
I would be hesitant to say a parking lot served by a single width driveway, allowing vehicles to go both ways, is a good configuration.
A house with 5 units in it, at the most.
Well, see, you have a vehicle coming off of Wynwood Road into the driveway. There's a potential conflict point that could occur at that building or in that driveway.
So it sounds like, the number of units here and the size of this again, and the kind of need to consolidate the parking is sort of driving us into a kind of, parking exercise that is simply not what, we had envisioned for South Narberth. These complicated loop driveways, which aren't actually even legal under our code. So again, it's almost, there's what the code says and the intent of what we're trying to accomplish, and I think that's important for you to think about. Are there any, I guess, there are any other commissioners besides Jim who would like to comment on this? Okay. Does anybody know when Chris Yohan, have any idea when he might be back? Was that the last topic to talk about?
I will try to text him.
Okay. I hate to make people wait, but it really doesn't make sense to talk about stormwater unless he's available. It's not fair. But while we're waiting,
Hi, how?
Oh, hello, Chris.
Hello.
Are you able to join us now?
Yes. My other one's not over, but I heard you talking, and so if I can help, I would like to do that.
Well, we appreciate that very much, and I know it's hard to juggle this. Chris, we've talked about the urban design site planning. We just had a conversation about the traffic circulation and driveway. We began to talk about the stormwater and realized you weren't on, so we put it on hold till you got back.
Good.
And we have someone does not have their.
We have fragile egos.
Excuse me. If you are not speaking, please mute yourself, or I will clear the room of the audience. And Chris, since you are the host, I can't mute people. We were. I asked Eric to start by leading us through the comments that he had made in his letter, or the issues that he raised. Eric, can you go over that quickly again, what you said before, now that Chris is on the call?
Yeah, Chris, all I did, I basically summarized that any new development would have to comply with the stormwater management requirements, and that would be fleshed out at a future phases of the plan. That regard with the floodplain, I was walking through basically how the floodplain is defined now, the study that you're preparing to propose to change the floodplain, and that we have provided technical comments, and that you're working through the process. And that any modification of the floodplain would require both local and federal approval, and we're working through that process now. So I guess, Todd, are you looking for any kind of feedback from Chris at this point, or?
I also have Mari McGeehan from the Lower Merion Conservancy is attending this meeting, and I know she has some questions too. So maybe I can ask Maureen to give her questions.
Yeah. Yeah, so Conservancy has a handful of questions. A couple might have been touched on a little bit tonight. But so the first, and thanks Todd for inviting me to ask these questions. Our first question has to do with page 2 on the plan, the general note 2. That says the majority of the proposed development will be directed to and collected by a series of inlets and conveyed to an underground stormwater management system. It also says that the water that is collected will be, quote, over controlled. And so my question is, so the system collects some, but not all of the stormwater. How much is the system designed to hold? And maybe in terms of inches per storm, and how do you define over controlled?
Okay. So if I could switch to, can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes.
If I could switch to this plan. So at this stage, we don't have to go through the full stormwater calculations. However, we're supposed to show the intent. And so basically, for both Narberth and Lower Merion, we need to meet the code requirements for rate and volume controls. And you try to collect as much of the site as possible to do that, but it's not always possible to collect everything because you're kind of chasing your tail a little bit, where you put the stormwater on the low side and then you're trying to collect area that was for stormwater to do more stormwater. So what we have shown in this plan is a drainage area line in red, and that is where we're anticipating collecting the area. We then have this rectangle and a thick dashed dark line, which we're anticipating the size and location for an underground stormwater system. Again, it's not sized yet, but that's the anticipated size. And so we would pipe the downspouts from both buildings to that. We show an inlet here in the parking lot and some spot elevations and arrows that showed the stormwater would flow down through here to this inlet, would be piped into the system and out to a level spreader where it would be discharged. And so hopefully that answered a little bit of your question. Hopefully this will answer the rest. When we do the stormwater calculation, we have a pre-development number for the maximum allowable flow that can leave the site. When we analyze the post-development flow, we separate it into two parts. One is the controlled part, which is in red. We would then run it through the system. We'd slow the water down, and then there'd be an uncontrolled part, which would be like this area here, where there's a slope from the system down to the spreader, a little bit of walkway. There'll end up being some uncontrolled area here on the downside of the wall. Any grading that happens in that area. And so we would run that control as we can't slow that down. So whatever rate that is, it is. So we might have to slow down what goes into the system even more to make sure that we meet those requirements. So when I put that note on there, that's what I'm trying to convey, is that we're collecting as much as we can, but what we can't collect, say this graded area here, we will slow the collected water down even more to make sure that overall we meet the code requirements.
Okay, so at this stage, is it premature to say how many inches per storm that underground facility could catch or would catch?
Yeah, it's a little premature for that. We haven't done any of the calculations on what the volume would be and the rates and how many cubic feet. What I can tell you is that with both municipalities, we need to meet rate control requirements for the 2-year storm, the 5-year, the 10, the 50, the the 25 and the 100. And then we have volume control requirements. I believe for Narberth, it's the 2-year, and for Lower Merion, it's the 25-year. So we'd be meeting the Lower Merion, the more restrictive of the two, and documenting compliance with both codes. So I don't have the square or the cubic footages yet, or inches or anything like that. That would be in probably a 100-page packet that we would submit during the preliminary plan stage.
Okay. And then is there any plan for that system to filter out pollutants from the building and parking lot runoff?
So again, it's a little premature for that, but we typically propose a series of things to address that. You know, it might be for roofs, it might be roof gutters, or I'm sorry, what are they called? The things that prevent the leaves.
Strainers.
Yeah, strainers. On the gutters, leaf strainers. And then we have, before it goes into the system, we would have what's called a sump, where the pipe coming in and the pipe going out are the same elevation, but the bottom of the box is lower. So that's where you could clean out leaves or, you know, stones from a parking lot or things like that. In times where you might have a parking lot where you think there might be some contaminants, you could put in some type of other device that, you know, they have some that are almost like a pillow that you would put in the drain, and it would kind of soak up the pollutants a little bit, and you would replace that pillow every once in a while to help with contaminants. Besides that, the recharge or the infiltration part also helps with getting those pollutants into the soil where they're treated a little bit, as opposed to running off directly to the stream. But we're a little premature for those things.
Maybe let me try to ask a question that's hopefully not premature. And so the plan shows this installation of the subsurface stormwater feature. It's very close to the floodplain. We know it's important to ensure that system does not encounter groundwater and potentially lose its capacity for managing stormwater. And so I'm wondering if there's been a detailed geotechnical evaluation done, or if there's a plan to have one done to evaluate the depth of the groundwater prior to construction.
So that test has not been done yet. The test you want to do at the location of the stormwater system and also at the depth. And so one of the first things that the tester would do is determine what's called a limiting zone. That would be either a water table, or it would be a rock, or something else that would prevent the water from infiltrating. And so ideally there would be no limiting zone. However, for this property, I think we all know there is going to be a water table somewhere. And so that would be determined, and then the tests are supposed to be done at least 2 feet above that. And that's where the system would be. So there's at least 2 feet of soil between the bottom of the system and the limiting zone. And so in this case, part of the reason we have the system where we do have the parking lot raised up, is that ideally that system wouldn't be as deep. It would be able to be higher, so that the bottom of it is a little closer to grade and not down into the water table. But no, those tests have not been done. We kind of need to get through this stage to find out the layout of the buildings and the driveways before we can determine the best location and depth for that system.
Okay, so I'll probably come back and maybe check on the answers to those questions. With regard to the floodplain line, that's the change that's proposed there. Does it sounds like you're prepared to go through the approval of that adjustment. Does the adjusted floodplain account for increasing precipitation rates, or will it, once you have approval or as you're preparing for?
So we have to meet the regulations of the township and FEMA. And so whatever their depths of rainfall are, that's what we need to meet. And so it's a line that FEMA creates based on the 100-year storm and their rates. It's not something that we can choose what we want to design it for.
Okay. And I have a number of questions related to riparian buffer, but I'm thinking those perhaps are premature. I think maybe Maggie Dobbs touched on this this area of the code that I saw that states that if a perennial or intermittent stream passes through the site, the applicant shall create a stream buffer extending a minimum of 50 feet to either side of the top of bank of the channel. The buffer shall be maintained with the encouraged to use appropriate native vegetation. I'm assuming that that calculation was properly done, and the result really is only this minimum 10-foot buffer. That's the minimum required buffer permitted. Is that correct?
So that code section asks for 50 feet, but then says that it can be reduced to 25% of the applicable side or rear yard. And that's consistent in both Narberth and Lower Merion, and I believe some other codes. And so that's why we show the 10-foot, which is the minimum. But at this time, we don't have a landscape plan to show how that would be planted. And even though we show the minimum line of 10 feet, you can see that the floodplain line extends well beyond that in some locations where it's 35 or maybe 50 feet between the distance of the edge of the stream and the proposed improvements.
Okay, so you do know that the side yard setback is less than 50 feet?
Yeah, the side yard requirement is, I believe it's 15, or in Narberth is 7 feet.
7 feet.
Correct, 7 feet.
I think that's probably all I have for now. I think my other questions are perhaps too soon, and we'd hold them maybe for the next phase once you have more information about the stormwater system.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, if you've been reading the chat, I don't know if you have, a couple of questions have come in, and I'll just mention or comments, and I'd like to mention them to you to see if you have any responses to them. One is that somebody observed the property flooded on the Elmwood Avenue in August during a 7 to 8 inch rainfall, and that damage occurred to the line stormwater channel. Somebody observed that water from East Wynwood sheet flowed into the channel in several locations. Someone observed water sheet flows down the R5 embankment along its entire length on this end of Elmwood Avenue. So these are people who live in the neighborhood. Maybe they even have properties on Elmwood. What would you tell them if they're concerned about this exacerbating the things they're observing already?
So I would tell them that our initial calculations of the floodplain, that 350 acres, I believe it was, is what drains through here. And so what we're talking about here is these lots 2 and 3 are about 1 acre. So in terms of the overall amount, this is a drop in the bucket. That being said, we still are going to work to meet all of both Lower Merion and Narberth requirements for stormwater management, just as their properties would have to if they develop theirs, or any other property in Lower Merion or Narberth.
But if you observe that kind of, I know that the creek drains a large watershed above, upstream, but have you observed that same kind of sheeting on this particular site? That means that in a particular storm event, there's a large quantity of water that's amassed and passing through this site. I believe that's that implication. Have you Do you have a way of observing that or measuring that or dealing with that?
I have not witnessed that. I was forwarded a couple of pictures, one of which appeared to be taken somewhere in Elmwood Avenue, somewhere around where my hand is, and which showed basically the water coming to maybe right around where this walkway hits the sidewalk and extending, along this side of the building, right around where the blue line is shown, along the edge of the pool. I saw another picture that appeared to be taken somewhere standing in the stream. And as you look out towards the railroad tracks, it appeared to me that the water was coming up right around where this 10-inch oak tree was, which, we did measure from the creek and from the, I forget if this was a hemlock or cedar tree. So from the pictures that I saw, it looked like it was fairly consistent with the blue line. And this location actually looked like the blue line was further out from where it was. But I also saw an article from a Chester County engineer that said that based on the depth of flow and the time, that could be equated to a 1,000-year storm. So I did see a few things. I didn't see anything to me that showed that the current FEMA line or the blue line were off base.
Right, but I think the implication is it's not so much about the lines, but the water that you're observing there, some of it is coming down through the site that's going to be built on. The water coming from the road, the water coming from the railroad embankment. You've shown a small area, I guess, that you would capture. The red area that you showed, you would capture a small area of the embankment. I guess, the question I'm seeing here is that would this development exacerbate and channelize and accelerate those other flows that are already causing problems for this area?
So I'm not sure how any water traveling down, so anything traveling down East Wynwood, just based on the contour lines, doesn't appear that it would be entering the front of this site, and it certainly wouldn't later once the sidewalk is built. I mean, there's curb here, there's sidewalk behind it. We'd have the same condition later, which basically wouldn't allow water to come into the site here. In terms of any water that comes uphill, we are showing a little off-site. If when we get further into the calculations, we find that there's more, and that it's appropriate to put a few drains on the high side of this building, then we will do that and pass it through the same way that it travels through. So based on the contour lines that I see, some of those over, switch to this other plan. We're here. It looks to me the most that could enter this site would be going up to the railroad tracks and over to the bridge. And so if we get further into the design and we need to include a little further area, then we'll do that.
Okay. Are there questions from any other planning commissioners about this topic? Or any other topic that I might not have raised so far this evening? Jim, Dave, Heidi, do you have any other questions about this or any other topic? Maggie or Eric, before I ask for going to the public comment section of the meeting, is there anything else you would like to ask about or comment on that you didn't have a chance to comment on earlier? You guys okay?
I'm just wondering, Chris, have you guys put any consideration into what the stormwater would look like with the other driveway design?
I have not gotten that far yet, but I assume it would be very similar with an underground system here underneath what will end up being an elevated driveway. I'm sorry that I missed some of this discussion. This What we show here along this right-hand side of the driveway is a retaining wall that would essentially hold that up, that parking. So it would be a similar design where the system would be in this elevated area and an overflow would come down on the low side of the wall.
Do you know approximately how high that retaining wall might be?
This time, it's just preliminarily, it looked like it'd be 4 to 6 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Falcone or anyone else from your team, do you have any comments you've been waiting to make before I ask for public comment?
I do not at this time, Todd, thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Falcone, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask this at the beginning, but I forgot. I see that the owner of record is a different entity from you. Can you tell us what your interest in this property is?
I'm not 100% sure yet. I have multiple options. I'm thinking possibly of keeping the units and using them as rentals, but possibly selling them. Until I find out the finalized plan and what they are, I'm not ready to make that decision yet.
But I think he's equitable owner under an agreement of sale.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, if there are no other questions from our consultant, the applicant, and thank you all for the applicant, and thank you all for. If you're not speaking, please turn off your. Please mute yourself. Please mute yourself.
No, it's messing up when I can't.
I would like to open it to public comments, and if the public doesn't mind, if you'd like to comment, please signal me in the chat rather than just trying to jump in, because I would like to give everyone a chance to speak, but I don't want to have a free-for-all. If you'd like to speak, just signal in the chat, and I will call on people as I see the messages arrive. I do want to acknowledge that we did receive a one letter about this topic today from Peter Grove, who I see in the corner of my screen. Normally, I read the emails we receive, but it would be a treat to hear Peter. Peter, would you like to make a comment based on the message you sent to us earlier today? Let me see if I can.
Can you hear me?
Let me see if I can. We can hear you.
Anybody hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. This is Peter Grove from 25 Narbrook Park. So many words, so many expert calculations on how to fit a gallon into a pint pot. But once again, there's an elephant in the room. And so I would like to say the following to the planning commissioners. And it doesn't sound like anything else that's been said tonight, but please, can the planning commissioners count up all the open spaces in Narberth outside of the sports field and Narbrook Park? You should have finished counting by now. Then decide if you want these gentlemen to cover this last little triangle of open land. We live in a delightful, almost storybook village. It's rare. That little plot hard against a major intersection, yet covered with flowering bushes, other wild plants, and with trees that screen the railway embankment, has long served as a sunny little oasis and a refreshingly natural approach to our village. I am therefore saddened to see it come under the sights of these developers who will destroy all of that. By definition, developers think development, rarely the preservation of open space. And here we are with developers wanting to build right on the very rim of a watercourse that already has a history of flooding communities further down as it makes its way to the Delaware. I urge you to weigh the anticipated increase in tax revenues from this proposed development against the permanent loss of this last delightful little parcel. I hail the borough's historic and ongoing commitment to keeping Narberth nice, to planting trees, your declared interest in promoting the pollinator path and the reduction of surface water runoff. This proposal flies in the face of all four of these commendable endeavors. One more paragraph. Please raise our real estate taxes by $5 or $10 a head and tell these developers to take their wretched plan elsewhere. Narberth is a special place, and this is a result of constant surveillance and careful management. Say no to this project, and you will continue this wonderful tradition. If I am completely wrong in my approach to this, and that something has to be built there, as Heidi says just now, if any buildings go on that lot at all, and I don't think they should be houses like the rest of Narberth, and not these little blocks of apartments that we see cropping up everywhere. Thank you so much for letting me speak. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, the Planning Commission.
Todd, you're still muted.
It's probably better that way, that I'm still muted, but here I go. This is the last call for anyone in the public attending the meeting who would like to comment. Just please place a note in the chat so that I can recognize you. I see Alex, you've raised your hand, so I'll note that. Is there anyone else? Just put a note in the chat. That would be the best way for me to know. Okay. So I have two people. Alex, I'll call on you first, and then there's one other commenter. So go ahead, Alex.
I agree with Peter Grove 100%. I want to I ask you please to not forget that the residents of South Narberth asked to reduce the number of units that were permissible in, at certain properties. And the consensus was, or the vote was, that they would not reduce it from 5 to 3. And it used to be 2 in that area. So you could only have a 2-family or a twin, I guess, a house on those properties. You could subdivide them, but in each property, in each subdivision, it could only be a maximum of 2. And that street is very not dense at all. It's more like Northwest Narberth, which is zoned for one family, single family. The residents in that area, in that specific area, and I'm not in that specific area, but in that maybe 2 or 3 block range, were very concerned because when they counted up the number of additional units that could be built even without subdivision, it came up to something like 20 or 21 in that little range, of the 2 block range. And that's the least dense part of South Narberth. So I would just ask you please to not forget that was not consistent with what the residents there, how that we envision our area of Narberth. And I also believe that area is a beautiful buffer against, from a very busy road into the community. And if we take that away, it destroys that. And the other thing that I'm really concerned about is the natural land, that we're going to lose that. It seems like Narberth could maybe get together with other municipalities, maybe Lower Merion, and maybe Shortridge Park could be extended into that area. There are a lot of options that we haven't explored, And I would like to see the owner of the property have some income from this. I mean, I'm not trying to cut off his income by suggesting that it not be developed, but I think that would be the ideal solution for me, because from my point of view, just because there is that is only well, in addition to Shortridge, that's the only area of stream that's not that doesn't have retaining walls built into it. And Narbrook Park, you know, gets, I guess I don't know if Narbrook Park has any retaining walls, but there is natural planting on either side of the stream to absorb the water that if it floods. And we've had a problem with the new drainage system, I think, right north of Narbrook Park already. I'm not sure exactly where that was. We also have drainage problems in the new stormwater system that was put in on East Wynwood right there. So, and then the person downstream from this piece of land on Woodside gets flooding, and he's got a retaining wall that comes up above the retaining wall. So that water is already problematic. And if we take away that natural floodplain, it's just going to make it way more problematic. And you've got this, you know, you've got the water coming down from the embankment, and it's just not a good place at all to have some kind of development and all that impervious surface. I mean, I'm just looking at it, and that's what I'm seeing when I look at it. So, you know, I hope if any development occurs there, it's one modest house or something that it faces East Wynwood and doesn't impact the natural land. But my ideal would be to have that natural land preserved somehow, maybe with the help of some grants, or, you know, the municipalities getting together and buying it.
Thank you. The other person who was interested in commenting has withdrawn. So there being no other people who have raised their hands, I'm going to close the public comment now. I would like to ask the planning commissioners, normally my procedure is to prepare a meeting summary, which we then send to council on an informational basis. I would like to ask the planning commissioners for you to let me know what you think the key points are that we should convey to council as a kind of record of this conversation tonight. Would anyone like to provide guidance as to what we should report back? Again, we're not voting. We're simply going to communicate with council about the conversation that occurred tonight.
Well, I think generally, in my opinion, we should be communicating to council that it's our preference that if anything gets built on these sites, that it conform entirely with the Narberth Code, even though some of it may or may not be judged to be in Lower Merion ultimately. That we should that it's important that those buildings conform to the frontage requirements of Narberth because they read as Narberth. It's important that those structures be scaled as houses, with a porch or portico for entryway, and a long list of requirements that will make those structures look like houses rather than apartment buildings. They seem to be taking up too much of the lot as well.
I'd agree with that, Todd, and I would go so far also as to reiterate the suggestion that was made earlier that Narberth and Lower Merion put their heads together and figure out a way to combine these properties so that only one municipality is in charge of them. It's going to be a nightmare in the planning and the construction and the administration forever if this project goes forward with a municipal boundary running right through somebody's bedroom. It's a nightmare in the making. We can tell from the conversation today that the uncertainty about whose zoning code applies is very difficult to resolve. And I think the proposal that was made right at the beginning of the meeting about eliminating this bifurcation makes all sorts of sense. I understand that it is Mr. Fromhold's point that it is a logistical challenge to do this, but in the end, everyone will benefit.
And I agree with Jim and Jim. And having said that, I think it's important, at least for me, to emphasize to council that this is, for all intents and purposes, a Narberth project. The impact will be much more on the borough than it will be on the township, and I think it needs to be approached that way.
Heidi, do you have any?
I agree.
Okay. Well, I will make sure, again, this is not meant to represent a formal vote, but I will convey those as strong ideas that emerged that are worth considering. For the public, it sounds that it is possible. It sounds like it's possible that this project will be back in front of us next month. So watch our agendas. That will depend on how the applicant, responds to this, and it will also depend on our further conversations with Lower Merion Township in terms of how we coordinate this review. But do keep an eye. We tend to post the agenda for Planning Commission meetings someday the week before the meeting occurs, and that's simply because sometimes it takes that long just to figure out and make sure everything is in order, for us to be able to hear an application. So that is, at least in the short term, what to expect going forward. If there aren't any other comments from the commission or the applicant, are there any other comments, Mr. Falcone or anyone on your team?
No, I would simply say thank you for taking all the time that you have to discuss this tonight. I presume that if we were to have this type of informal discussion with Lower Merion, they might feel somewhat similarly possessive of their interest in the property, but we haven't had that separate discussion with them yet. But I'm sure we will be having that, and I think bottom line here is this is challenging in many respects, and we will do what we can to try to address concerns to the maximum extent that we can. So we are, as I think everyone has acknowledged, in the initial phase of this, and there's a lot we need to process based on what we've heard tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mr. Falcone, thank you so much for making your team available to us for a very long conversation tonight. We appreciate the ability to talk with everyone to the depth that we wanted to, and we do look forward to see how these conversations evolve here and with Lower Merion as well. So thank you for coming to speak with us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
So we will move on. We do not have any other items on our agenda except approval of the minutes from September and brief updates about ongoing projects. So let's move to approval of the minutes from September, which I distributed over the weekend to the planning commissioners. Did anyone review them and have any comments or questions, corrections you would like to suggest? If the minutes seem to be in order, could somebody make to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Okay, so Jim Spear makes the motion and Jim Cornwell seconds. Any further discussion on the minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes as presented from September as presented, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes as presented are approved. I'll check them one more time for typos and send them over to the Borough Office for posting on the borough's webpage. The only other item is updates. I have no update about 230 Haverford Avenue to give you, so no news to report. 650 Montgomery Avenue, I can tell you the applicant submitted revised final application on Friday. I don't know if the borough office has posted them yet. I conferred with Aaron, and council will not be taking this item onto its agenda this month. I asked the borough office to make sure they circulate the submission to the engineer, Eric, and to Kevin, and also to MCPC, depending on the level of changes since the plan was last reviewed. MCPC may or may not need to issue a new letter. Best case scenario is this project will be in front of us in November for final approval. If there needs to be Eric, Maggie, or Kevin, it may take longer, but it's on track for approval this year, for review and approval this year. So you'll hear more about 650 Montgomery soon. And then I don't have a lot, I didn't mention it in the agenda. I don't quite understand everything that's happening. I don't have a lot to report, but the last zoning hearing board meeting, which dealt with 600 Essex and the retroactive granting of permission for a driveway. If you heard reports of that meeting or tuned into it, you'll recall the zoning hearing board denied that request for a special exception at the meeting. But after the meeting, they determined there were some procedural errors, and so the meeting was continued. And the zoning hearing board is going to meet again to hear further testimony regarding the retroactive permitting of a driveway that requires either a special exception or a variance at 600 Elmwood, Essex. And I haven't heard more about it, but I assume since I testified at the first one, I will be informed as to when that meeting will be. So stay tuned for another zoning hearing board meeting. Aside from that, I'm not aware of any other applications or coming through. So the last item is update from MCPC on the saldo or anything else, Maggie, you're doing that we need to know about.
Yeah, so we have been working through the saldo changes the last time that we met with myself and Eric, with Kevin and Sean. We were discussing the kind of final edits to our plan processing requirements. We are finalizing those edits. I have been in touch with the solicitor, John Walco. So he made some suggestions and went through some procedural elements with the plan processing and review. So I'm hoping to have those edits done very soon and out. And then the next step in the process is to take a look at the design requirements. So that would be Article 3, I believe, of the existing saldo. So we will be kind of going through and updating all of the design requirements and simplifying some of them and adding new requirements to reflect the current status of the borough and looking ahead at the designs that we want to incorporate. I believe I may have mentioned this to you all already, but do anticipate that we will be making some transitions between the zoning. So we will be pulling some things from the zoning and putting it into the saldo, and then just cross-referencing anything in the saldo into the zoning. So we will be making some modifications to the zoning code as we go through with the saldo, as there are some elements in the zoning that are better handled through the saldo and the use of a waiver requirement instead of a variance for some of the standards. So those I will point out as we go through them, but know that we will be taking the next couple of months and diving deep into the design requirements with the input, of course, of Eric and Kevin and Sean. So that is our next step. So we are slowly but surely making our way through the document and hope to have something. I don't know what our timeline is for getting through it. The first half of it, we started in March and April. So a couple of months to get through this first half, and then the design standard. So if it takes about the same amount of time, we would be looking at perhaps a early to midsummer of a completion of the full edits to the south of. So that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at.
Can't happen fast enough.
I'm working on it.
There's a subdivision and land development ordinance, which is like the zoning, one of the tools the borough uses to manage land development. It talks more about generalized procedures and standards, not specific to the design of different neighborhoods. I forgot one other thing before we adjourn. Very good news. Thanks to substantial efforts from Maggie and John Walco and myself, we have completed the omnibus zoning amendment that we've been working on all year. John Walco submitted to council today for consideration on its agenda in October with the request that they consider it for advertising. And if they do advertise it, then it goes through a certain time review process, but that would enable them to vote on it by the end of the year. For those of you watching at home, that is ordinance which has a lot of amendments related to zoning downtown. It has some fine-grained amendments related to the size of houses in residential neighborhoods. We've been working on it for so long. What else is in there, Maggie? Any other major topics in there? Definitions.
Building definitions. So we have added a few definitions to clarify some of the terms that we use, especially things like secondary frontage. If you recall, over the past few amendments, it was 1010 and 1014. We added some provisions for treatments of corner properties on Windsor Avenue, things like that. So we have just gone through and made some clarifications for some of that, and put in some unifying language. We had been using kind of different terminology to refer to the same thing through the different amendments that we have made. So we went through and corrected all of those to use uniform language, and the definitions are in support of that. We clarified building height. So I know Chris had brought that up as being something that was a little bit confusing in our code. So hopefully with this amendment, we will be clarifying that and making it easier for everyone to understand how building height should be measured.
Provisions about things parking garages, all the provisions we talked about, frontages for mixed use and commercial buildings, all the stuff we've been talking about. I think there's only one or two people from the public on the line, but all of this actually has been documented in the past minutes and reports of the Planning Commission, as well as all of these issues have already been discussed with council. And so based on council's feedback, we finalized all that. So that text hopefully will be in council's next packet for its next meeting, and that at which point it will be accessible to the public. So thank you all. Our year of work remember we wanted to do quick lightning zoning amendments? Yeah. Thank you all for that. Is there anything else anyone would like to know?
Just quickly, hey Todd, I would be interested if you could preserve the text or the chat of this meeting. I haven't been able to see anything but little snippets of it flash by, but the comments that people have made.
Right. How does that work?
I don't know.
May I have there's nothing else besides that. Can we have a motion to adjourn? No one wants to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
You got in first and Dave got in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And what do I say at the end of every meeting?
Drive safely.
Everyone. See you around.
Bye.
Thanks, all. Have a good night.
Thanks.